Alright, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the size that I decided to make mine. I just wanted to store a few 1-inch hexagons inside just to take with me for a small project or just to do a few blocks at a time. They can easily hold thread, scissors, or whatever, and so I've just used a spool of thread in this one to hold my hexagons up. And you can choose to close it with a snap, Velcro. I like these little buttons and a ribbon, so whatever you choose on that is fine. First, I decided how wide I wanted my project. If you're going to be putting pencils or something like that in there, you might want to make it a little bit longer, and I'll show you that on the pattern, how to adjust for that. And I also wanted it to hold 1-inch hexagons, so I made my end caps a little bit larger so that I could easily get my hexagons in and out. Alright, I want to start with a few free tools that you can use online to make your shapes if you want to print up your own papers and your own patterns. I don't usually order the pre-cut papers because I like a certain kind of paper, and I also use interfacing quite a bit. I do cut out using my AccuQuilt. I also use my brother's Scan and Cut, but if you don't have a digital cutting machine and you need these pattern shapes, you can print them up yourself using whatever paper you want. So the first thing I want to show you is the omnicalculator.com, and when you go to their website you can just type in hexagon in the search and you can go right to hexagon calculator. So they give you a little geometry lesson here, and the measurements that we're going to be looking at is this widest part of the hexagon. And as you know, a hexagon is a little bit shorter in this direction as it is from point to point. So they give you the letters that represent this line, which is what they call the long diagonal, and that's the one we're most concerned with. And then you have the short diagonal, which is any measurement from a flat side to a flat side. Alright, so the great thing about this is you don't have to do any kind of calculations yourself, because all you have to do is tell this one how big you want your A, which is A is your the sides of your hexagon to be. So if a pattern calls for 1-inch hexagons, all you have to do is go over to the little A here, type in 1, and make sure that this says inches or millimeters or whatever it is the pattern calls for. And so the two measurements that I use the most are the long diagonal and the short diagonal, those measurements that I showed you here. So I usually pull this one up as a reference if I'm using a drawing program like Corel Draw. Inkscape is a free drawing program, and Adobe Illustrator is also another paid program that you can use to draw these up yourself. But if you just want to print up a page of hexagons, then what I'm going to show you today is going to work. But I do like to know what my measurements should be so that I can make sure that the graph paper generators are working correctly. So if you did a search on your computer for hexagon graph paper, you're going to come up with a few free programs, and this one is peachprintable.com. But I wanted to caution you that when you see the hexagon on the page, you can see that they've got the widest part of the hexagon, the point to point, is facing vertically. And so the measurement, when you type in a measurement right here, say if you wanted a 1-inch hexagon, it's going to give you a 1 inch from side to side. It's not going to be that measurement that we want for the actual length of the sides. So you would have to know, if I want a 1-inch hexagon using this generator, I'm going to have to come over to my calculator and say, oh, it needs to be 1.732, and you're going to have to type that in. That's why I don't use this one, because I don't want to have to go back and look. So I'm just cautioning you on which one of these that you have to be careful with. So if you go to mathpolate.com and you choose their hexagon graph paper, this one, they orient the hexagons from side to side with the points going sideways. But again, they are not giving you the measurement of the sides. This one's a little bit easier to use because you can say, if I want a 1-inch hexagon, I'm just going to double that and put 2 in this box. But again, that's some more math that you have to do. So if you go to incompetech.com, you can choose, you can search for it. Just go to graph paper, and then you can see all the graph papers that they have in here. It's a lot of them. And so we're going to go to the hexagon one, if I didn't pass it up. Plain grids, patterns. Okay, hexagonal. All right, so you can choose how dark you want your lines to be. You can, if you say 1/2 inch hexagon, that's going to be 1/2 inch sides. So for mine, I need a 1-inch one, and I need a 1.25. So all I'd have to do is type in 1, and then I can come over here and choose what color I want my lines to be. I can change the size of my paper and margins, and then when I click on download PDF, I can either open it or save it to my computer. So if you print it up, just test it and make sure that and measure these sides to make sure it's 1 inch before you cut your pattern out. So what I would do is I would print it and choose my printer, but I want to make sure one more thing on whatever your printer settings are. Mine may be a little different than yours. Go to more settings on your printer and do not let it scale it. So on my printer, it wants to fit it to the printable area, and I don't want it to do that. I want it to print at 100%. So I can say actual size, or I can say 100%. And so anyway, you want to make sure of that. So when you generate this PDF from the program, from the website, it's going to send you a PDF that has the exact measurement. So you want to make sure your printer does what you want it to do when you actually print these up. So what I would do is I'd print this up, and I'd either print it all on the weight of paper that I like, or I would just staple this to some interfacing, which I like to use on a lot of projects, and I would cut out my shapes using this as a pattern. You can decide how thick or how stiff you want these. These both were made a little bit different. I think this one was the first one I made, and it's a little bit stiffer because I used different materials inside. So the one I'm making today is probably going to be the thickest that I've made so far, because I'm using extra interfacing and batting and things like that. So I prefer them not to be too squishy. For my little hexagon pouches, I actually pieced together some hexagons to make my outer fabric, and then I chose a lining fabric that was different. And on the end caps, I have a different lining on the inside as I do for the outside. And you can embellish the outside before you go too far in the project, or you can just do anything you want, or you can just showcase like I'm going to do today. I'm going to fussy cut my end caps. Very beginning, but when you're planning your fabric for your end cap, you need to be sure if you have a little emblem that you want to face in a certain direction. The top of the pouch is going to be this little flat piece that's open, so you want to plan your fabric placement so that your cap will be facing in the direction that you want it to. For the end caps, I cut, these lines are just something so that my scanning cut would see it on the scanner. I cut 4 of these. It's the Pellon 808 craft fuse, and it feels like paper. So when I fuse this to the back of my hexagon, I get a nice little edge, just like paper, turning it under. So this is going to beef up the end cap. So this is going to be the finished size of the end cap. And so I cut my my little fussy cut piece bigger all the way around than that, and then you can put this on a light box and or hold it up to a window and get your interfacing put exactly where you want it located on there. So I'm going to fuse that onto my outer end cap fabric, and then I'm going to do just like we do with English paper piecing. I'm going to baste all the edges down. So for the lining of the end cap, and I've also cut 2 pieces of Peltex. You can use batting for this too, for the end caps if you want to, but I wanted my end caps to be really stiff. I've never tried it with the Peltex before. Last time I used batting because I wanted to do a little bit of hand quilting on there. So that, whatever you choose for that, but I do think you need a little bit more than just the interfacing. So for the lining, I have chosen this honeycomb fabric, and I'm going to fuse, these are my templates, so I'm just going to fuse these onto the back of the lining, and these are for the end caps, and I'm going to leave enough space in between them, and then I'm just going to rough cut all the way around after these are fused on, so that I can have 2 pieces, one for each lining of my end caps. I made my pouches long enough to fit my glue pen, but I didn't make them quite long enough for my friction pins, but that's a personal choice of your own. So now all I have to do is glue baste these down, and that is as stiff as paper, so it's really nice using this heavy craft fuse. So I'm going to baste all of my pieces, my B fabric, and my other lining piece. I'm going to baste all of them down. Alright, so I've got my 4 pieces ready. So if you were going to be putting some embroidery or something like that on the end, or a little button or something, you need to do that now, because it's going to be a little bit harder once everything's sewn together. And on this one I just put a little tiny hexagon in the middle. So if you want to do some applique or something like that, do that now on your outside fabric. So I need my batting or my Peltex to be a little bit smaller than this, because we're going to be sandwiching and it's going to get in the way. So I'm going to go ahead and trim off a little bit. So if you're using batting, you'll probably have to do the same thing. So I'm just going to trim on all 6 sides. Sometimes I lose my place, so I just count. So that's 3, 4, 5, and 6. So that's going to be just about right. So trim off as much as you need so that you can sew these 2 pieces together. The Peltex that I'm using today actually is fusible, but I'm not going to fuse it down. I could if I wanted to, but it's not necessary. So I'm going to take a lining piece, my batting or Peltex, and my outer end cap, and I'm going to use a ladder stitch, invisible ladder stitch, to stitch these together all the way around. And whatever stitch you want to use is fine. I like the ladder stitch because it's pretty invisible. Alright, I've got my little batting, my Peltex in the middle there, so I've already sewn a couple of edges up, and the way I do this stitch, where the thread is coming out on the yellow fabric, I'm going to go straight across to the white fabric and take a little bite in the direction that I'm going. So where it's coming out on the white fabric, I'm going to go straight across to the yellow fabric and take a little bite. So I'm just inching forward as I go. And then you can just pull that thread snug, and it just kind of pulls everything together invisibly. Alright, when you finish sewing your little end caps together, you can just set these aside, and I like the stiffness of these. I think it's going to be really sturdy compared to the softer ones I did before. These are working fine, but I think I'm going to enjoy these sturdy ones better. So for my lining, I chose this honeycomb fabric, and for my outer fabric, I have some hexagons pieced together. So you're also going to need 2 pieces of medium to heavy weight interfacing. I'm still using that craft fuse. I think I got it at Walmart. It's the Pellon 808 craft fuse. And this is actually going to be your pattern piece. So for the outer fabric, I'm going to center this on here. And actually, since I pieced my hexagons with the heavy interfacing, I probably don't need this at all. But if you're going to be using another piece of fabric as your outer fabric, you're going to need to interface it. And so I'm just going to center this on here, and this is going to be my pattern piece, and I'm going to cut this, I'm going to trim this out exactly the size, and this is 5 inches by 8.75. And if you're making your pouch to fit a different size hexagon, you would take whatever size you chose for your end cap, and you have 6 sides, so you're going to multiply that by 7 because we need a little bit of an overlap here. So it'd be 6 sides, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, plus the 7 for the overlap. So I had cut my end caps to be a 1 1/4 inch sides, so I multiplied that times 7. So that's how I came up with the length. So you don't need seam allowances or anything like that because the edges are going to be bound. So I'm going to center and fuse this to my outer fabric, and then I'm going to cut exactly on the edge of this interfacing because this is going to be my pattern. But for the outer fabric, the lining fabric, I'm just going to take a piece that's bigger. And I usually just start with something that's a couple of inches bigger all the way around, and we'll trim it to 1 inch later. So this again is going to be my pattern piece. So I'm going to fuse it down to a larger piece of fabric, and then we're going to take our batting and our outer fabric, and we're going to make a little quilt sandwich with it. So for now, I just need to prepare my lining and my outer fabric. So to recap, if you're making your pouch the same size as mine, you're going to need 2 pieces of interfacing and 1 piece of batting cut 5 by 8.75. So my iron just heated up, so I'm going to go ahead and fuse my pieces down and go and trim this up. Alright, I've got my pieces trimmed up. I'm going to just put some safety pins on here. I'm going to line up my batting exactly on that interfacing, and I'm going to line up my outer fabric and pin these together and go and stitch some quilting lines on here. You can quilt by hand if you want to, or you can quilt by machine. I'm going to quilt by machine because this interfacing is so thick, I think it would be really hard on my hands to quilt it that way. So quilt it in whatever way you want. Alright, I've just done some simple quilting. I didn't really want it to show all that much. I can add some embellishment to the middle of this one if I wanted to. I probably won't do that on this one. I'm just going to go and rotary cut 1 inch seam allowance all the way around from the edge of this outer fabric. So now I just want to do a little pressing to help things out a little bit. So I'm just going to fold this raw edge here to where it touches the raw edge of the actual main fabric there. So I'm just going to do that all the way around, and that's going to get everything in control for me so that it'll be easier to stitch. So I'm just going to go all the way around, and I'm not mitering any corners at this point. Alright, part of my video got lost, but once you've pressed this raw edge in about halfway. So this should be about 1/2 of an inch. You're going to press the raw edge to meet the raw edge of your little quilt. And then we're going to use this as binding. We're going to fold it over again. And I'm hand stitching my binding down. So in the next video you'll see how I take care of the corners if you want to miter the corners. You can always square the corners if you want to. Alright, I'm going to do my best to stay in the camera and zoom in enough for you to see, but I've stitched all the way to the corner, and my lighting is terrible here, so I may struggle a little bit, but I've stitched all the way to the corner. So I'm just going to lay my needle down for now, and what I want to do is leave this folded, and you can trim it up if you want to, but it's not a big problem. So I want to fold that exactly in a 90-degree angle right here and as straight as possible there, and just finger press it. So I could actually iron it because I'm at the ironing board right now. So just to secure this, I've got my thread right here in the corner already, so I can just kind of do a little tack stitch right here. Stomach is growling, it's lunchtime. Alright, and so once I've got that secure, I can just tie a knot if I want to and cut my thread at this point, but I may just try to keep going. We do another little knot here just in case I want to cut that. And just park my needle. Alright, so now that I've got this 45-degree angle going on, I'm going to try to fold this very neatly with this raw edge meeting like we did before, and finger pressing. And my goal is to meet the point of this right here with the edge of the one I've already stitched down, and hopefully I end up with a mitered corner. Alright, so I may go ahead and cut my thread because it's stuck under there. So again, I meet that little point right there with the edge that I've already sewn down, and then I clip it. And I can press this or just fiddle with it till I get a nice mitered corner, and then I'll tie a knot in my thread. I'll bury my knot, I'll sew this miter down all the way to the top, and I can fiddle with all these little creases and make sure they disappear. And that's why I like to do it by hand, because you can really manipulate this to the way you want it to look. And then once I get up to the point, then I'll bury my thread all the way back down to the corner and keep going to the next edge. Alright, I finished binding my little quilt. It's nice and sturdy, and what I want to do is go ahead and mark the top edge of my little end cap, because I don't want that end to be closed. This is going to be my open side, so I don't want to sew anything to that. So I've got that marked. And the other thing you might want to consider is marking straight lines across, or using pins or a dot or something like that, so that when you sew the other hexagon on the other side, that they meet, because you know, when you're sewing by hand, you may not meet at the same place that you think. So if you have a straight line drawn across the side or some kind of a mark, you'll know that when I get to that mark, I better be at the same corner that I was on the other side, because we're going to be sewing across here. And what I did on this one is I hand quilted some lines apart so that I would know where each hexagon was going to meet so that they would meet at the same point across the thing, if that makes sense. It's really hard to explain. Alright, so I'm going to do a few little marks here since I don't have any quilting lines to go by, so that when I start sewing these on, they'll end up at the same place at the other end, because it'll skew the whole pouch if you don't. Alright, since I know my sides are 1.25 inches and they came out pretty close to that, then I'm going to mark my markings 1.25 inches apart. And you may end up with an odd measurement at the other end, but that doesn't matter because that's going to be the flap. So I'm going to mark this on the wrong side. Even though I'm stitching with the wrong sides together, I just don't want to have to worry about removing marks later. This is a fabric pencil, but sometimes I don't want to bother with trying to get the marks out. Alright, so I'm going to mark every 1.25 inches all the way across, and then we'll get ready to start stitching. Alright, I've got all my marks on the wrong side, but I can spot them on the edges there. So I'm going to start, and I've got this one marked with a pen because I want to be sure I'm leaving the correct side open. And I'm going to just get this started by putting them wrong sides together and getting it as close to my mark as I can, because I am going to fudge with the sewing if I don't end up right at that point, because I want both of my hexagons to end up at that mark when I get to it. Alright, I've got some regular sewing thread here because it's going to be a little bit stronger than that 60 weight that I was using. And I've got a knot in my thread. I'm just going to start anywhere here on the outside, doesn't matter, because I just want to anchor that knot somewhere over here on the outside. We'll cut it off later, and that's going to help me get started. Alright, so I want to pull in as much of this yellow fabric toward the quilt as I can. So I'm going to grab more right in the yellow fabric and not the white fabric. So right where they meet, I'm going to take a little bite of the corner, or I'm going to knot these two corners together first. I'm stumbling over my words. The lighting is, I keep complaining about the lighting, but where I have my camera set up, it's not the best place for sewing. So before I get the thread pulled all the way down, I'm going to put my needle, dropped it. Put my needle through that little loop and make a knot. I pull this slowly because it can really knot up on you before you're ready. So I pulled it snugly together, and I'm going to do that again. Do it as many times as you need to. 2 or 3 is good. So this is my second knot, and I make sure those corners are pulled in tight. So now I can just do my little invisible stitch, make sure I'm still in the camera. I'm going to take a little tiny bite. It's less than 1/8 of an inch. I'm taking a little bite of the yellow fabric or the quilt fabric, and then I'm going to take a little bite of the end cap fabric on the yellow, so it's coming out on this side toward me. So I'm going to go straight across and get really close to that white fabric and take a little bite, just like I've done all the way through this project. This is the ladder stitch. It's what I call the ladder stitch. It'll want to open up on you, but as you go you can tug and snug things up, and it'll start closing up and staying shut. So that's going to get in my way. Make sure all this thread's not getting tangled. So my goal is to end up at this little mark. So if I find that I'm going to go beyond it, when I get about halfway across, I'm going to start fudging a little bit so that I can make it land at that point. So I'm going to keep sewing until I get to the corner. I'm going to do 2 or 3 enforcing knots right there in the corner, and then we'll turn the corner to do the next side. Alright, I've sewed to that corner. I've put 2 or 3 knots there. So now I can just kind of manipulate this around to where I'm matching with my next mark. And matching that up, wrong sides together, and you can put a clip there if you think that's going to help you. The clip just gets in my way. And so now I'm going to just stitch up to that point, making sure I land right there. And I'm going to keep going until I get to that side where the opening is supposed to be. And I'm only going to sew the 5 sides, and remember to leave that open. And then I'll repeat the whole process on the other side of my little quilt. And then we'll end up with the pouch. And we're near done. So the only thing left is to add whatever kind of closure that you want at the end. But I'll come back when I finish sewing my 2 end caps on. I just want to show how I hold for the opposite side. I've got this one side sewed on, but it's really not that difficult. This time I'm facing the little end cap toward me, and I'm just putting it inside the bag, the pouch, and I'm just still holding them wrong sides together, and it's not that hard to manipulate to get in there and get it done. So in case you were wondering how hard it is to do the second side, it's not bad at all. And there's only Alright, if you want to do it like I did the previous ones that I made with a button and some baby rickrack or a ribbon or something like that, you can find a button that matches, or you can cover a button with some of the self fabric. So whatever you want to do is fine. I'm not sure about this color here, but I think this is about 14 inches. It was some leftover that I had. But you want to have enough ribbon to go around. So what I would do would be anchor this ribbon with the button, sew them down together, and so they'll be ready to wrap around and secure your pouch just like we did here. So I think that's going to be really cute. So that's really all there is to it. I don't want to show the process of sewing a button on because I'm sure you know how to do that. So